Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles podcast. I'm also the founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to single-family offices. I am super excited about today. I listen to a lot of podcasts, watch a lot of videos and people from YouTube, from Twitter, to Instagram. And I have on today who I think is the most diversely creative, intellectual person, probably right up there with my friend Adam Robinson. And that would be
Adam Robinson's a friend of mine.
Oh, he's been on 4 times and he's due to come on next month. And I knew you would know him, James Altucher, because you're probably 2 like-minded souls.
Yeah, I've known him for about 20 years.
That's great. And everyone, so you know what the hell I'm talking about. Our session today is James Altucher on problem solving, investing, Bitcoin, and much more. Our guest is James Altucher. He's a former American hedge fund manager, author, podcaster, and entrepreneur. He's founded or co-founded over 20 companies. He has published over 20 books and is a contributor to publications including Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, and Huffington Post. James Altucher, more formally, welcome to the show.
You know, thanks for having me on. This is really great. I'm super excited to be here.
Let's get right to it. As I mentioned, I normally like to do deeper follow-up, but James is so diverse in his knowledge. I'm going to go a little more rapid fire in this one. So James, the first question, are we living in a simulation? Why not?
You know, that's such an interesting question because let's say like our civilization has been digital for about 50 years. You know, we started with computers about 50 years ago. And already we're creating virtual realities that they're not, you could tell you're in a virtual reality. You won't be fooled into thinking this is real, but they're getting better and better and better. So imagine if there's a society that's been digital for 1 billion years. You know, the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Imagine if there's a society that's been digital for 1 billion years. Their virtual realities are probably completely realistic, like beyond realistic. And so they might have billions of real world virtual realities as every bit as complex as our world. So I think the odds are it would be silly to think we're not in a virtual reality. Like, why wouldn't we be in one created by a civilization? There must be many civilizations that are over 1 billion years old.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a little bit about it.
That said, it doesn't matter, actually. It's just like thought masturbation a little bit.
There's always talk about the pyramids being so ahead of their time, and it does make you wonder, from ancient civilizations, did we have greater tech many, many years ago? You think that the archaeologists would have discovered it, but maybe it was very discreetly taken away. Have you ever thought that we might have had even greater tech thousands of years ago?
I don't think that, because that would be very complicated to hide from an archaeological standpoint. There's no evidence that there's anything like that. I mean, it's very interesting how in the civilization of Maya and in the Egyptian pyramids, then they have very similar pyramids with very similar math behind them. And then you also have Easter Island and those statues, and no one knows how they got there. But so yes, there's unanswered questions, but I don't think it's from an ancient civilization, though.
And some of the questions I'll be asking James, and again, more rapid fire, are part of a series that I consult with single family offices. I call it Things to Ponder. I actually have about 200 of them, and they grow, and they are all over the place. So stay with me on it. James, the next one. Will the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, plus Microsoft and Tesla, be all powerful in 10 years? Or do you think DeFi, blockchain, VR is going to disrupt all of them?
Yeah, another great question. So I think we have to stop putting the FANGs in a similar group, because, for instance, Tesla and Netflix perform very different functions than the other members of that group. So Netflix, for instance, a few years ago, Netflix had no competition as a streaming service with a ton of content. And Netflix has really great content. I'm happy to be a subscriber. I love the shows on Netflix, but I also love the shows now on HBO Max, on Amazon Prime, on CBS All Access, on Disney Plus. there's so many streaming services, you know, and YouTube also. I probably now have tipped over and watch more YouTube than regular, you know, TV or streaming TV. So I don't know if Netflix will be as powerful in the future as it is now, unless they continue being creative and develop good content. Same with Tesla. Like Tesla is worth more than all the, you know, car companies combined. You know, Elon Musk is a extremely talented entrepreneur, and part of that is being a showman, and he's very good at it. He's the PT Barnum, the Thomas Edison of our age. But I wouldn't count it in the class of Google. So Google and Amazon, I think those are the two stacks that will survive. And by stack, I mean they offer everything. So Google offers everything from email to image search to map search to you know, cloud storage. Amazon, everything you could buy, anything you could possibly buy, anything you could possibly sell. Plus Amazon Web Services, they offer their entire infrastructure for sale. So I think those two are separate. They'll always be powerful and stick around, but I'm not sure about any of the others. Facebook, I don't know. I feel like this election and politics in general have kind of, you know, harmed Facebook a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised. This is, I easily wouldn't be surprised to see Netflix and Tesla slow down their growth. And it's a little harder to say about Facebook because social networks have such power going for them.
Mhm.
But I think Facebook's going to slow down as well. Google and Amazon, though, they're going to rule the world. Like they're more powerful than any individual country right now.
It's great points. I did say I wasn't going to go too deep, but I can't help myself. A little bit of my 2 cents. I completely agree with James that Netflix to me is the most vulnerable. What's happening in the metaverse, we briefly hinted at it with simulation before. What's happening in the blockchain, what's happening with how users are going to get paid to watch content and paid in certain crypto because they want your information and your thoughts in terms of your big data, for lack of a better word. And maybe Netflix will evolve, but it's hard for big companies to do that. I would probably disagree on Facebook. If Zuckerberg had his way, he'd be buying up every competitor. Look at the great price he got years ago, and people laughed at him on Instagram and some of the other things. So it'll be interesting how it will play out. Let me rephrase the question a little differently. What type of company do you think will make it into that lexicon, FANG plus two, in 10 years? Biotech, longevity, anything would pop to mind?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I might. This is why I was a little bit hybrid in my answer in terms of Facebook as opposed to Netflix and Tesla. In the tech space, and I'll answer your second question as well. But in the tech space, information is power. So, and by information, I mean data. So, Facebook, Google, Amazon, they know more about you than you probably know about yourself. And they know more about individuals than any other company on the planet. And so, in the tech space, companies that accumulate, they're really data accumulators. That's the business they are all in. Google is not a search engine. Amazon's not a store. Facebook's not a social network. What they are is extreme data accumulators, and they do it very well. And that's going to be the key to success for these companies. Now, in general, I do think you know, a category that is growing exponentially but is still small is biotech, and specifically genomics. So
Yes.
when something grows exponentially, you know the story of the history of chess, how the origin of chess.
Oh, I had a chance to ask Adam Robinson and many others a lot of questions about chess, but I don't think I know the history of it.
This you know, farmer in India, that's supposedly where chess started, shows the emperor this new game, and they start playing, and the emperor loves it, and the emperor says, "Oh my gosh, I'll pay you whatever you want if you leave this game here. I love this game. I love chess." And the emperor said, "Ask whatever you want." And the farmer said, "Okay, no problem. I want 1 grain of rice on the first square. I want double that for the second square, so 2 grains of rice. double that for the third square, so 4 grains of rice, then 8 grains of rice for the 64 squares of the chessboard. And the emperor's thinking, gosh, just a couple of grains of rice, this guy's an idiot. So he agreed. And by the time they reached, because of the doubling factor, by the time they reached half the board, uh, uh, the emperor had to give his entire kingdom to the farmer, so he cut off the farmer's head instead. And that's the story of the history of chess. But the point is, when something is exponentially growing, it appears small for a very long time. Like, think about computers. Gordon Moore in 1965 said computers will essentially double in power almost every 2 years. And Intel was worth 3 million then. Now it's worth close to $1 trillion. So it took a long time for the double, and everything. The industry still seems so small. But after 20 years, 30 years, suddenly it's the biggest industry on the planet. So genomics is still in that phase where it's doubling very quickly, like every year, 2 years, maybe even tripling. But it's still at that 1 grain of rice, 2 grains of rice, 4 grains of rice. It hasn't yet taken over the entire world. It will, though. Our entire way we view life on Earth is going to change because of these companies. So genomics is the key there is, well, which genomics company? Who knows? So, in something like that where an industry is doubling every so often, every 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, you just invest in all of them, and that's the key to success. Any exponentially growing industry, just invest in all the companies.
We are exactly on the same page on that. That was a great overview. And I'm just so afraid something may go wrong on my side. So I will allow my attendees or anyone to also record on your side. Then I can rely on you in case something goes wrong with that. My next question, will China surpass the US, and when and why? And I'm going to go with 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. They're putting in way more of a grind than we do, but there's much deeper than that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting because they are, of course, also exponentially growing, or at least growing very quickly. But I actually don't think they will ever surpass the United States. And I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here. We're all sitting here in the United States, probably most of the people on this call. It's just that, uh, even today, China does not innovate the way the US does. And I've had a lot of opportunities to talk to investors in China. So a good friend of mine also was on my podcast. Also, I went to graduate school with is Kai-Fu Lee. He a long time ago, he created the voice recognition technology that we now call Siri. Then he went to Microsoft and did the same thing. And then he went to Google, and then he ran Google China, and then he quit that and became a big investor in China. So he was visiting one time, and he is very bullish on China and very bullish on their AI because they have no ethical limitations. So
Right.
whereas we might, like, take genomics, we might be nervous about cloning somebody. They're like, hey, we'll clone people and give them 3 arms and a larger brain, and if they die, they die. If they don't, we'll create a race of superhumans. So they have no moral qualms as to anything they're doing. But that said, I don't really see them innovating. Like, almost all of their business models are business models we started, or we initially created. So I'm not willing to say that they're going to beat the US. Now, of course, anything could happen, but it's a long time before I would really bet on China, particularly with their current government. Like, you can't win with this government. It's a very corrupt, I don't like to use the word evil, but this is a bad country, and bad countries typically don't have large amounts of success. They have to switch governments first, and then we'll see.
My next question makes the Bitcoin maximalist always a little bit like, why are you asking that question? But I don't have to worry about that among us. And I did ask it to Saylor. Is Satoshi a number of intelligence agencies plus the IMF? If we all know about SHA-256 in the mid-90s, the NSA, the CIA, Crypto.ag in Switzerland back in the 60s, and who funded them, How Finney and other things we could talk about, it does make you scratch your head a little bit, but I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. What do you think?
Well, so are you asking who is Satoshi, or is he a government agent of some sort?
Open-ended like that. What do you think?
I think Satoshi is a real human being, and he's a very, very smart, incredibly smart person. My guess is he lives in the United States. In fact, and I don't think money is his motivator. I mean, he's worth what, like 40 or 50 billion dollars right now, or maybe more than that. Money, but he hasn't made a single transaction with Bitcoin. You know, he has not sold a single Bitcoin. And I, you know, I think this is somebody who was very frustrated with fiat currency and gold as an alternative, and quite correctly, because gold has no real functional use. People say, well, gold is real. Not really. Gold is just a rock. And a long, long time ago, people decided that gold would be a currency. But there's no other reason why gold's a currency other than that, you know, 4,000 years ago, some people decided it should be a currency along with silver and copper and so on. So Bitcoin actually has functionality beyond being a currency. So that's important to know, is that,
Absolutely.
you know, Bitcoin, you can create almost anything you see, any software project you see now, you can create better with Bitcoin, without going into all the details about blockchain and how Bitcoin and Ethereum do it. But I do think Satoshi is someone who was very interested in coming up with an alternative, coming up with a digital alternative. We've seen the evolution of digital money ever since PayPal and so you know, and wire transfers and all that kind of stuff went digital. And now this is just the next evolution of that. I do happen to think I have my own opinions on who Satoshi is. I think he's a very well-known blogger in the space, very intelligent guy. And I always read the guy who I think is Satoshi. I always read his blogs because it's the most intelligent blogs about crypto and Bitcoin and so on. I'd rather not say his name just because I don't know for sure if he's Satoshi, and I don't want to harass him if he is. But I personally think this guy is an incredibly smart guy.
So you think it's one person as opposed to the consensus, besides possibly indirect or direct involvement, U.S. government or another government? Some people say China. But
I will say though that the U.S. government is happy crypto exists, as much as they
completely
say.
agree.
Yeah. So
Completely.
I've you know, it used to be the case that you know, let's say we have a war going on in Afghanistan. It used to be the case that huge planes, you know, military planes would have to bring buckets of cash money to Afghanistan to pay off the warlords. And crypto has been a great way for them to privately do transactions like that are a little bit, not a little bit, but a lot below the radar. And you know, the US and probably every single country are the biggest users of crypto out there, actually. And but Satoshi is certainly not. Satoshi is sort of anti-government, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what happened with the pipeline being held for ransomware and paid with Bitcoin. And because that was so important to our country, notice how quickly, like that, the US government got right on that and went right in there. I mean, and this is a talk that I've had with Adam Robinson. He was like, never underestimate the US and perhaps China with what they have on AI, on early stage quantum computing, the resources they have, the unlimited money they could spend, the people they could contract out to. It's unlimited. If they really want you and they really want something like that, it's important enough, they're going to go find it.
Yeah, he makes a good point. The only thing is there's a theory I call, like, how do you validate what he's basically saying is there's a conspiracy, not an evil conspiracy, but that there are huge things happening in government that the average person is not privy to. And the only problem I have with that is a little technique I use called conspiracy numbers. So how many things have to conspire in order for this conspiracy to be true? So if, let's say, for instance, the US or China had already made this enormous quantum computer. Let's just say the US is an example. How many people have to be aware of that and keep it secret. Like hundreds or thousands of people would have to be aware of that. So my guess is something like that is too too many people would have to keep a secret, and that's unlikely. Most people can't keep a secret at all. So to expect hundreds of people to keep a secret from our government, it just seems ludicrous. So I don't think it's as quite conspiratorial as he says, mostly because the US government and most governments are kind of stupid when it comes to technology. Now, Google and Amazon's another story, but we would be aware if they were close on quantum computing. We really know what the state of the art is on AI, and Adam Robinson should know too. Like the state of the art on AI, we see as an example with Alpha Zero, which is the computer that learned how to play chess in 4 hours. It was it's owned by Google. It learned how to play chess from scratch without knowing the rules in 4 hours, and then became the best computer in the world, the best chess player in the world in those 4 hours, starting from scratch, not even knowing the rules. So that's kind of the state of AI right now.
Wouldn't you love to have on your show? You're a bigger name, so you could perhaps get him. I did DM him on Twitter. I'm trying, but Eric Snowden. Imagine the information this guy has with the right interview or what would come out of him. Have you tried? Would you love to interview him?
Yeah, I would love to interview him. I don't know if I've tried. I think I may have tried once a while ago and did not hear. So yeah, but again, I think his knowledge is probably old news now. Like I think right now,
Good point.
he was around several years ago. Things change really quickly. Like the scandal. This happened in 2016. Cambridge Analytica had all this data that we didn't realize they had all this data. Their data now is like old news. Like like the average marketer has so much more data now than Cambridge Analytica. It's ridiculous. So I think things like that. Again, news happens. The news, the information cycle is very fast. So whatever Snowden knew 5 years ago is old news now.
I'm looking at my next question. It's now a little dated, so I'm going to say it, then adapt it. I'm chuckling. Was it wise for Elon to put Bitcoin on the Tesla balance sheet? Wow, there's been a lot of talk in the last week, as in one tweet, he basically kicked Bitcoin in the you know what. And I haven't followed it the last day or so if they are liquidating some of their position on the balance sheet. What do you think?
Well, I don't think they're liquidating any of their position. I'll start off with that. And then, was it wise that he did this? Of course, because one thing we know now is that Bitcoin or crypto in general is here to stay. There's a lot of functionality, and at the beginning of the pandemic, particularly when they started talking about the first stimulus package, nobody really knew what would happen when you print up, trillions and trillions of dollars. Do you know in 2016, about 100 economists made a prediction of how much money would exist in the world today, 5 years later in 2021. And they basically said there would be about $10 trillion in 2021. In fact, there's $28 trillion in the US right now, and of fiat currency, because they printed up so much money this past year. So I think, and gold doesn't really help you. Gold, everybody was worried about not only inflation, but perhaps hyperinflation. Gold doesn't really help you, because if the economy and the banking system falls apart, where are you going to get your gold? Like, do you have gold in your basement? Do you carry it around? You can't store gold at all. So I do think people they breathe a sigh of relief when they realize Bitcoin is the solution to any inflation concerns. And so I think that's why people like Michael Saylor and Elon Musk started buying cryptocurrencies. They started switching their cash reserves, which they had billions of, to cryptocurrencies, because what if there's a year where there's 20% inflation or 30% inflation? Now, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but you never know. You want to own dollar denominated assets, but not dollars. So dollars, when they inflate, they lose value, and so everything else appears to be more expensive, including Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been the biggest beneficiary of fears about inflation. So I think that's how I think that's why Elon and Michael Saylor are doing what they're doing now. You know, Elon made a statement about crypto, about Bitcoin and the environment, but that's just Elon Musk being Elon Musk. It has nothing to do with how he's actually investing or what he's doing with the cash reserves of Tesla. They need to diversify. The dollar is too uncertain. You need to diversify. By the way, the stock market also is a great hedge against inflation. But right, Bitcoin as a currency became the best hedge against inflation because what other currency would you trust? There's no other. The entire world has had a pandemic and economic lockdown, so there's no currency to trust except a currency that's sort of outside the general market, which is Bitcoin and crypto in general.
I mean,
I myself, I every month I buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a couple of the DeFi tokens. So I don't care if it goes up. I don't care if it goes down. I make a regular payment, a regular acquisition every month.
yeah, that's almost, I guess, like dollar cost averaging. We'll, dive a little bit into that sooner rather than later. There's lots to chew on there. So right now, maybe the market cap is what? Probably because it's been going down a little under $1 trillion. Gold is arguably 10 trillion. Do you think we'll hit a point within 10 years? Basically, I'm saying, will Bitcoin 10x in 10 years? I think yes, that it will pass gold. And then will you see sovereigns and central banks start to put it on their balance sheet?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question in my mind. So, gold, the Winklevoss twins wrote a white paper on this, I think last April, and they basically said Bitcoin will replace gold as a store of value and as kind of the flight to safety. Which they estimated would put crypto at about 400, a price of 400 to 500,000. And,
Right.
but then they said what you're saying, which is that, but that doesn't even count that some sovereign countries will also buy crypto. So, and we'll also start to switch to crypto. And we see this every time there's political uncertainty in any country, crypto goes up. So whenever it was a funny thing that happened about a year ago, I guess, uh, who was it? Argentina banned people from buying crypto. That day, even after it was banned, was the one of the biggest moves up for crypto because everybody in Argentina started buying crypto. So, and the same thing happened when we officially left the nuclear accords with Iran. Billions of dollars flowed from Iran into Bitcoin, and the same thing will, when Capitol Hill happened, by the way, on January 6th, that was one of the biggest upward moves of crypto we've seen. So the political uncertainty was here for the first time. So I think crypto's got a long way to go. One thing we know for sure, crypto is not worth $50,000. Let's say it's at $50,000. I have no idea where it's at. Crypto is not worth $50,000.
You mean Bitcoin?
Bitcoin. It's either worth zero or it's worth at least $1 million, if not more. This is just we're just at the train station waiting for our next ride. Like it's not going to stay at 50,000. This is sort of a ridiculous price. It's on the way to something. And Peter Thiel made the great point that the higher Bitcoin's price is, the more likely it is to go even higher because it means there's more buyers. It means a lot more smart money is in crypto. And, the smart money is not putting $1 trillion into Bitcoin just for the fun of it. So this currency is here to stay. And I have no doubt about that.
I mean, another point is, and this shocks people, but approximately half the world, like 4 billion people, have very limited or no internet access, with satellites going up thanks to Elon and others over the next 1 to 5 years. And now they get access and they're often unbanked. Bitcoin and certain select other cryptocurrencies, I think, are poised, volatile, yes, but poised to really skyrocket. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, and I do think the DeFi tokens are just beginning. Most
For
people
sure.
haven't even heard of them. Like I've been following crypto since 2012, 2013. And I only just recently became aware of what's going on in the DeFi space. And it's unbelievable what's going on. Like it's very impressive. And I think we're just seeing the very beginnings of what's happening there.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. So I've spoken about on some podcasts that if you're an intermediary, especially a bank, but even insurance brokerage, DeFi is going to disrupt you. Is it going to happen in 6 months? No, it's not going to take 10 years. I think it's between probably 5 and 10 years. But there's going to be a major disruption. And these are entities where there's no CEO, there's no board of directors. I mean, theoretically, they may have a DAO or a foundation. I get it. But these are entities that are self-governing, so to speak, by the people that are active believers as a peer-to-peer network. Don't you agree? It sounds like the answer is yes, that DeFi is going to change so much. Actually, what potentially happened with the pipeline, if our electrical grid, well, let's switch to that, was decentralized, a lot of the problems that we may have with an unknown sovereign looking to mess up the US, a lot of that would go away. DeFi has many purposes.
Yeah, I agree. DeFi is what Bitcoin is to money, DeFi is to Wall Street and banking. The entire banking system is in question with DeFi. So, let's see what happens, and which one, it's hard to call a winner right now, but DeFi is very strong at this point.
Now, would you say, in my opinion, partially because they're all too powerful, but they're more creative than people think they are, the top banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they're going to be just fine. But the middle tier, partially due to central bank digital currency and programmable money, and partially due to the better opportunities in DeFi, those banks, I hate to use the word toast, things adapt, but I'm not optimistic long-term about small to mid banks.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing about the big banks, they have enormous crypto teams at this point. Like
Yes.
they're not fooling around. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're not wasting time, implementing solutions in crypto. So I think we're going to see a lot of stuff in the next few years from the big banks. We already Jamie Dimon in 2018 said Bitcoin was a fad or a scam or whatever. Now they're starting crypto funds, JP Morgan. So they catch on, and and trust me when I say they have a team of people who only focus all day long on DeFi. That's what they do. And they also, all these banks also assist hedge funds in understanding this relatively complicated space.
We'll come back to aspects of Ethereum and other quote unquote aspects of crypto shortly, but let's change things up a little bit. What's your opinion about psychedelic use and psychedelic as investing? Look at some of the companies on the Canadian Stock Exchange. Last year, they crushed it.
Yeah, well, it's a great question because, we talked about genomics, and I do think, genomics is going to handle a lot of medical cases that even people claim for psychedelics. But there is a lot of evidence that psychedelics are good for depression, epilepsy, anxiety, chronic pain, even things like autism and other development issues. Why is, think about it, why are psychedelics mostly illegal? Like Oregon is the one state where they're legal now as of the last election. But why are most psychedelics illegal? It's because the government was threatened by them at one point. And, marijuana was illegal, but alcohol was legal because, predominantly at that time in the 1920s, African Americans were smoking pot and other people were drinking more. So alcohol became legal and pot remained illegal. But there's tons of medical uses for all of these things. Johns Hopkins is doing a lot of research right now on the medical uses of psychedelics, and they're a pretty smart university to be doing this. I have a lot of, I've never used a psychedelic for anything, but I'm a pretty heavy believer. And I know a lot of people who are pretty heavy believers that there are medical uses for these drugs and so on. And I do think there's going to be opportunity in the US to invest in psychedelic related companies.
My next question relates a little bit, and we'll probably come back to it, to the education system. Everyone says to think for yourself, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's something else. That sounds good. And I asked Saylor this question and others. One, is that true? Think for yourself. But how do you learn to think for yourself?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd be curious about Saylor's opinion because he's a guy who definitely thinks for himself. But I think the way you do it is be, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but I'll give a specific technique at the end. The thing is to always be curious. So to always ask why. So if everyone says, well, Facebook's clearly the winner of the social networks, Google's clearly the winner of search engines, well, why is that? And what could happen that could change that? Really ask and think about it
Mhm.
before making a decision. Now, it might be true. Maybe Google, no one's going to compete with Google. Let's just say that's true. It's still worthwhile uncritically and unjudgmentally asking the question.
What
And
would cause you to change your mind? It's a great question to ask.
yeah, so you asked that about everything. Like for instance, back in 2005, I wrote an article that in the Financial Times that to it was called "Don't Send Your Kids to College," but it was basically about how college has lost its use. And we see this now 16 years later, 15 years later with the pandemic. A lot of people were not able to attend college. So what happened is, you know, or people attending college remotely, and colleges were claiming that was the answer. But the reality is, uh, uh, right now when I hire people, let's say I hire a programmer, I don't ask them what degree they have. I ask them what skills they have, and that's the only thing that's important to me. So it's really worthwhile asking if you're hiring people. It's really worthwhile understanding what is actually important to you. Is it a degree from Harvard, or can this person program? Can and someone once asked me, well, do you want a random person doing brain surgery on you, or would you prefer a Harvard medical school student? Well, I want someone who's done a lot of brain surgeries. I really don't care where they went to school. A Harvard person could be just as bad as anybody else. I just want to know they have a great track record of doing brain surgeries. And I think that's what's going to be the most important thing, is not what school you went to, but what you know, what knowledge you have. And knowledge and ideas are going to be the currency of this next century. So now I said I'd give something specific. How do you develop a an open mind? How do you develop this kind of curiosity? Well, a good technique that I've used, and by the way, I started using this as almost like this was during a time, this was 20 years ago. I started doing this specific technique I'm about to describe. I went totally broke. I sold my first company, and I didn't really know anything about investing. This is like, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And, uh, I was really depressed, and I didn't know how was I going to survive. And so what I started doing every single day was writing down ideas. So I would write down 10 ideas. I took out a little pad, a waiter's pad. Let me see. I don't have one at my desk right now. Um, I would take a waiter's pad and I would write 10 ideas a day. So it could be ideas about businesses to start. It could be ideas about books to write, articles to write. It might be ideas. Here's how Google could be better. Here's how Amazon could be better. And by the way, the goal is not to have 10 good ideas a day. That would be impossible. It's 3,650 good ideas a year. The goal is just to exercise the idea muscle, to exercise that curiosity, to exercise expanding what you think is possible in the world. And again, most ideas will be bad, but it's important to exercise that muscle. If you don't, you use it or lose it. So well, like any muscle, if you don't, let's say you don't walk for 3 weeks, you will need physical therapy to walk again. And that's how critical exercise is. So it's the same thing with exercising this idea muscle, this creativity muscle. And without that, as people say, oh, inspiration hits me, and then I know, like, I get hit by lightning. But it doesn't really work that way. You have to be really good at coming up with ideas and exercising that muscle. And I'm really grateful that I had been doing this. So for instance, I might write, one time I wrote 10 ideas for Amazon to improve their self-publishing business, which was this back in 2016. This was a big aspect of their business. And I sent it to Amazon just randomly. I sent it to Amazon. I sometimes I send my ideas to people. Sometimes I don't. Depends on the ideas. And someone from Amazon wrote back to me and said, "Oh, this is great. Thank you very much. Let us know if you're ever in Seattle, and we'll let you see all the latest products we're working on. We'd love your opinion." And I wrote back and I said, "Well, it just so happens I'm going to be in Seattle next week. Can I stop by?" And I had never been in Seattle before, and I had no plans of being in Seattle, but I did that, and it was a great experience. I got to know a lot of people at Amazon, and I learned what they were working on. And now when I have a problem with any of the books that I publish, I know who to call at Amazon. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this sort of 10 ideas a day exercise. By the way, the reason I met Adam Robinson is because I was doing 10 ideas a day. I wrote some software to model the stock market. I would look for statistically significant patterns in the stock market. Like I'll make one up. Like if Microsoft goes down 5 days in a row, there's a 90% chance it goes up on the sixth day. Who knows? That might be a simple pattern. And I sent this to a hedge fund manager who was Adam Robinson's boss at the time. He invited me, and I said, "Here's all the software that I wrote. You never have to contact me again. I'm just giving this to you because I admire you." And of course, he said, "No, this is great. Why don't you come visit me and my team and talk to us about it?" And Adam happened to be working for this hedge fund manager, and that's how I initially met him.
Oh, wow, what a small world and a great story.
Yeah, that was in 2002. I met Adam.
Yeah, yeah, like you said, almost 20 years ago. One of my favorite follows is a gentleman on a combination of crypto, sports betting, gambling. I recommend people follow him on Twitter. It's Jonathan Bales. I believe it's Bales Football. He has a saying, most of what you know is wrong. What you know that is right, most of it is shit and doesn't mean anything. I broadly think that he's correct, but how do you focus on what matters, is working, and is important?
I think you don't really know. You don't really know in advance. There's a couple things. One is you can't decide through thought what's important and what's not. You actually have to do it. So, when Larry Page and Sergey Brin started Google, they didn't realize how important what they were doing was. They tried to sell Google. They like being graduate students, so they tried to sell Google to Yahoo, and Yahoo said no. Then they tried to sell Google to Excite for $1 million, $1 million. And Excite said, "Hey, we'll do it for 750,000." And Sergey and Larry Page said, "Yes, we'll deal." But then the board thought Google was so worthless that it wouldn't even pay $750,000 for Google. And so that's when Larry Page and Sergey Brin decided, okay, well, let's figure this out. And so you don't really know what's important until you're actually doing something, and that's an important concept to realize. So, other than that, I don't know how to answer really. Other than when I start a business, for instance, I try to do it as manually as possible. I don't want to write any software. I don't want to spend millions of dollars. I don't want to spend anything. I try to experiment and see, is this idea a good idea? And if it's not, then, uh, I'll know pretty quickly because I'm doing this manually. I'm doing as much as I can manually.
It's going back because, again, I tend to jump around all over the place, but to what you said earlier relative to Amazon and its AWS, there is potentially a threat to it. I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 2 years. That would be those in the crypto community. And its coin was listed recently on Coinbase, and that would be Definiti. Do you have any knowledge or opinion about it?
I don't know Definity. No.
Definitely check it out. If it's legit, a little debatable. They may be talking that they can't deliver, or maybe they could in 20 years. I don't know, but definitely check out Definiti. That will basically decentralize the internet and everything. So speaking of DeFi, it's got approximately 196 million of VC money behind it. That's a lot of dough. Of course, Andreessen Horowitz is probably lead. but I find it very intriguing.
Yeah, I think this idea of decentralized, it looks like they do decentralized Forex. I think stuff like that's going to be very huge. Like right now, and I'm always open about it. I'm not pushing this at all because I don't know if it's going to be nobody knows what's going to be the winner and what's not. But I've been accumulating Uniswap tokens, UNI.
Yeah, Uniswap is great. I
Yeah.
actually use the platform, but the tokens are great as well.
Yeah, no, because the platform is actually being used, there's billions of dollars of transactions a day on it. I feel
Exactly.
comfortable buying it. That's kind of like an early generation DeFi token. Who knows if it's the winner or not, but it's kind of like how Bitcoin was the first. Might not be the best, but it was the first.
Because you may want to have diversity in your swap holdings besides Uniswap, do you have Sushi Swap and Pancake Swap?
No, I don't actually. But I've thought about it, but I keep it simple.
I'm going to go back to the college thing because it's going to hit close to home for me. So I have a nephew that's a junior, and I have a son who's a senior in high school, about to go into a school here in Connecticut. They're both interested in entrepreneurship and business and finance. And I'm thinking to myself, knowing what I know, which really is only the last 10 months about crypto, about digital, I know going in and me paying a lot of money for my son's degree, he's going to learn nothing
Nothing.
about crypto or blockchain or DeFi.
Zero.
He's going to learn it from what? Older tenured professors that take a 2-hour learning lesson how to teach it. They're not in the trenches being an entrepreneur. No offense, I'm sure there are some exceptions. So I had a thought. How about this thought, James? Would I be better off him going to college, me being whatever, 40, 50, 60 a year out of pocket? Or how about option two? I put 40, 50, 60,000 a year into a select basket. I don't know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, BTT, Rune, Uniswap. Would my son be better off in 10 years? Maybe not 4 years, although I think so. He would be way better off in 4 years. He'll have it made, assuming he
Absolutely.
has the discipline and puts in the work and doesn't spend it all.
Absolutely. But kids are sort of brainwashed, and I'm not saying your kids specifically, but like my kids too. They're all sort of brainwashed into thinking college is really important to get a job and to get educated. But like you say, you don't really get educated. I always challenge people, what do you remember from college? And most people, the honest answer, and I really appreciate when people give an honest answer, most people don't remember anything from their college years. And uh there's a reason for that. Like college focuses again on doesn't really focus on critical thinking as much as a job would. It focuses on memorization. I always ask people, who was the 15th president of the United States? And if I'm giving a talk, I'll ask this to the audience, and I'll say, don't worry if you don't know the answer. uh Most people don't know the answer, but it's funny how the answer is very important in American history. This is a guy who arguably created the Civil War because he's the president right before Lincoln, and it's James Buchanan. But nobody ever gets the answer correct, and so I always think just college, you only really learn things that you're interested in, and that's about it. So in terms of education, I think you learn about crypto by doing crypto stuff, and you learn about programming. I went undergrad computer science and grad school computer science. And then when I started my first job, I was so bad at computer programming, they had to send me to remedial classes in order to program. Like that's how bad I was. And you know, it's a sad but true story. Like I had to really learn how to program after not learning.
So I told my son this and I get in trouble, is a real value of college that you get away from home, you become independent, and that you interact with, assuming this is your interest, but you have romantic relationships. You learn how to meet people, how to work with people. You grow into a man or a woman maybe quicker. Am I paying only for that? Maybe. And is that worth it? I don't know. It might be.
Yeah, but I sort of think, oh, people say like, oh, in college you learn how to socialize. Trust me, an 18-year-old living in a city and working is gonna socialize. That's not an issue. It's BS that's the reason for college. But in terms of I don't know. I honestly don't know what a really good use of college might be.
I mean, I could even argue that engineering, being a doctor, being an attorney, we're going to come to a point with augmented reality, with VR, with online and remote, where even that's going to be something that could be more learned remotely than traditionally in a college. Are we there yet? No, but are we getting close? I think so.
Oh, I think we could. I think we're there. I think if you went
Okay.
to a good place, you'll learn these things.
Do you think that they would almost be better off taking psychology and philosophy classes as opposed to business and entrepreneurial classes?
Um, no, I think all like psychology classes in college is just it's like psychometrics. It's social psychology. It's not real psychology. I don't think I really don't think any of that. I can't think of a single look. I was in a very practical major, computer science. I put in my 10,000 hours programming when I was in undergrad and graduate school, and still I didn't learn the basic skills needed to be successful in the real world in programming. So it was a very practical major, and it just did not work for me. Now, some people say that's just you, but I got good grades. I had no problem. I got in. I was going to a very good graduate school. I was continued programming as well after school, but I didn't really learn anything. I didn't really learn what I was studying in school.
Yeah, no, that's very, yeah, that kind of basically says it all. What do you think about cryogenics? Do you think we could be brought back to life in just 10 years from now?
I don't know. I don't really think so, but I do think that there's huge strides being made on longevity. So in the past, people have treated longevity as nobody really treated aging as a disease. Like there would be heart attacks, strokes. These are illnesses that are treated and they're considered age related, cancer even. But what about aging itself? Is aging ever thought of as a disease? Is there any medicines for aging? No, because it's not considered an illness. But recently, scientists have started treating aging as an illness that could potentially be cured or delayed. And there's fascinating results. I recommend anybody read David Sinclair's book,
Yeah, he's
Lifespan.
great. I had him on.
Yeah, yeah. So stuff like that is very interesting to me.
For sure. And I believe, and I think you hinted at the same thing, that in 10 years, one of those companies, have no idea who, maybe they're not even around yet, will be every bit the FANG plus two that we see now. There'll be a giant company replacing one of those companies that's up there now. In today's world,
I
what,
do think that will happen in genomics, certainly.
yeah, that's probably the most likely. In today's world, what business could someone start, even if they're just graduating college, and as if this is easy, scale to millions in 1 year? What would you recommend?
It's a good question. Look, scale to millions. I think there's a lot of businesses you can start. Every day there's new business opportunities. So, for instance, I'll just spit out a couple. Right now, there's there, every company, every Fortune 500 company has a huge budget for compliance and for compliance related issues. So like and regulatory issues. Like, are you doing the right uh, thing with email? You have to save email for X number of years and then put it in the cloud for X number of more years, and there has to be security and all this kind of stuff. So, uh, but right now there's no. I haven't heard of any companies doing COVID compliance, and this is a big issue right now. It's not it's a non-trivial issue. So I do think we're going to see a lot of stuff with if you start a business now and say, look, there's 10 things you have to realize to be COVID compliant. You have to keep you should move the cubicles a certain feet apart. You should use these disinfectants. Every employee should have access to these particular sanitizing lotions, and on and on and on. And so I do think this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that hasn't even existed until now. So I think that's going to happen. And here's another thing: storage. Storage is there's more data. There's something like 30 billion hours of YouTube videos uploaded this minute and every minute. And so storage, and just to compare, Apollo 11 had 2K of data, 2,000 bytes of data, and now we're talking 30 gigabytes, 30 billion bytes every hour is loaded to YouTube. Forget about all the corporations and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. So I do think this is a big issue that's going to affect the planet. And but there's already very sophisticated storage businesses out there. So how can you take advantage? Well, what if you go to every company and say, let's just go to small companies? What if you go to every small, medium business firm and say, hey, I'll handle all of your wiping out all of your computers, and I'll do it for free. Just I get to keep the computers at the end. They'd probably say, sure, go for it. Like, why not? And then there's a market for used computers. So this is a $10 billion industry that's just developing right now and getting bigger and bigger. Like, people do this. This is what's happening. I think there's, and I'm not saying start a genomics company because you need particular skills and so on, but I'm saying companies that anybody could start. So here's another one. Most small and medium businesses don't really use their social media accounts to drive up to get business. And so what if you go to every personal injury law firm in your town and say, hey, I'll take over your social media for 1 month for free. And if you get more calls in and if you can make more revenues, you keep me on and you pay me a regular fee. And that's easily scalable to every town. If you do a personal injury lawyer and he's successful in one town, go to the next town and the next town and the next town. I know one couple that started a business like that, very similar to that. They focused on dentists, and in their first year, they did $1.5 million in revenues, and they were profitable every single month. So there's plenty of opportunities right now. And by the way, there's not really opportunities in jobs. Last year, out of 128 million workers, 55 million people filed for unemployment insurance at some point during the year. That's pretty sad if you think about it. And I don't see that changing, for instance. So
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of an add-on for that social media kind of person, depending on the kind of person you're working for, maybe someone who's a creative, please learn about NFTs. This is completely game changing in terms of what people that are, whatever, in modeling, in uh, music, in a variety of creative fields, or what I call creative, NFTs could be game changing. I repeat, look at me and my age. I learned how to create an NFT. Anyone could learn how to do it. I learned how to use blockchain browsers and Uniswap that you mentioned earlier. These are all things that anyone could learn. You know what? Just put in a couple of hours and you'll figure it out. Uh, Actually, ironic how I said a couple of hours and you'll figure it out. You said something earlier. I know it's one of your pet peeves because I listened to your podcast. Why is 10,000 hours bullshit?
well, so Malcolm Gladwell popularized this, and Professor Anders Ericsson is the scientist who studied this. And actually, in the 90s, I was part of some of the experiments he was doing to test the 10,000 hour theory. And the 10,000 hour rule basically says if you spend 10,000 hours devoted to something, you'll be, let's say, in the top 5 in the world for that activity, or the top 10 in the world. And I don't really know if that's true. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that's not true. But B, you don't need to be in the top 10 in the world to make millions of dollars. So, you don't need to be like, if you look at tennis as an example. I don't play tennis, but tennis is a good example. If you're not in the top 100, or if you're not in the top 200, you're not going to make a living playing tennis. But maybe you could be an announcer for tennis. Maybe you could be a uh, you know, some sort of uh, coach for tennis. Who knows? So there's a lot of opportunities to make money uh, other than just being a professional. You know, if you're one of the top people with knowledge of restaurants, you don't need to own a restaurant. Maybe you set up a high-end consulting service advising restaurant owners what to do post-pandemic, or who knows. So I do think it's very important, though, to experiment. And the way you get good at something really fast is to do things, to experiment things. So, for instance, with NFTs. Like you said, Angelo, you know how to make an NFT now. Well, now you understand what NFTs are. If you didn't make an NFT, probably you wouldn't really understand what they are. So I do think there is value to doing things and doing experiments. And if all you really need to be, you don't need to be in the top 10 in the world. You need to be in the top 10. You need to be in the top 1 or 2%, which is a much larger number. And then you'll be able to make a great living no matter what it is.
Let's again change direction, something that we mentioned earlier, but we'll dive a little deeper into it. The impact of memes for the younger generation, it's almost religious-like to them. And the extraordinary growth of Dogecoin, and Elon Musk is, I mean, does he want to bring Bitcoin down because he has tremendous holdings in Dogecoin, and supposedly he's working on development within the Doge crypto and blockchain. It is cheaper and faster, arguably not as secure as Bitcoin. Are we underestimating Doge because we think of it as kind of a joke?
Well, Doge really was started as a joke. I know the guy who started Dogecoin. I don't know him well, but I've spoken to him on the phone, and he started Dogecoin just totally as a joke, just to prove how easy it is to make a crypto coin and a cryptocurrency. And so I don't know why people like Elon Musk have such a fascination with it. It doesn't really have any functional use or any value. So I don't really know.
It has an incredibly powerful network effect, like I said, among the young generation that looks at it. And I don't want to get in trouble, but from a religious perspective, it's a little unusual. And I would not completely underestimate it from being a little bit of a hard fork, if that's the right word, of Bitcoin and Litecoin. I underestimated it for too long. So it is part of my holdings, although I do sometimes chuckle and laugh a little bit at it. What did you learn in launching and running a hedge fund, a fund of funds?
I learned that most hedge funds are scams in one way or other. Like they're taking extra fees that they don't tell you about, or who knows? There's so many different ways in which hedge funds kind of scam people. And I'm not saying all of them. I'm just saying most of them. I would not trust a hedge fund. And I learned it the hard way. I didn't lose money to any scams, but I saw so much in doing due diligence on literally hundreds or maybe even over 1,000 hedge funds. Most of them just in sly ways were doing things I thought were not moral. And by that I word it that way because the SEC doesn't even know all the ways in which the financial markets could be manipulated, but the hedge funds certainly know. And they're able to, before it gets regulated, they're able to do things that no person would do. And so I don't really trust hedge funds in general. Now I understand, for family offices, they diversify by putting money in hedge funds. I would stick with the big institutional sized hedge funds most of all. That's important.
Okay, but let me ask you about that. Don't most of those start off as niche managers? They start to do well. They start to get big institutional checks, especially from pensions, and the pensions don't want volatility. They want 5 to 7% returns. So they're cutting off the you-know-what of many of the managers, and that doesn't make them, big dog swinging for alpha anymore. They become net of taxes and fees to a private investor. A lot of them horrifically underperform. They're asset gatherers.
Yeah, I agree. They're asset gatherers. And it's which I thought would be me. Like I thought, okay, I start a hedge fund and I'll start I'll do well, which I was doing, and I would start raising more money. But it's a very particular skill to raise money as a hedge fund. I was doing great, and I remember one time I had this meeting with a huge hedge fund manager. He managed billions of dollars, and I thought he would maybe want some diversification. He agreed to the meeting, gave me a whole tour of his facility, and then we went to his office. He said, "Okay, James, I like you. What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, it'd be great if you maybe invest in my fund of funds, and I'd give you an exposure to an asset class that you probably don't have exposure to, because I specialize in one specific strategy." And he said, "Listen, I like you. You could have a job here anytime you want, but I don't know where you're investing this money. I don't know. I don't want to take any kind of corruption risk or anything like that. And then he pointed to himself and he said, the last thing we need to see on the front page of the Wall Street Journal is the name Bernard Madoff Securities. So, so Bernie Madoff did not invest with me. And then I was thinking to myself as I was walking away from his building, boy, I don't have his kind of returns. He seems to raise money really easily. What hope do I have? And so I basically got out of the business because of Bernie Madoff.
What a crazy story.
It's a crazy story.
What's the most important thing for a ultra high net worth investor, institutional investor, whatever, to ask a hedge fund PM?
I think transparency. I think you want to know everything they do. And it's not like the investor is going to mimic their strategies or anything, but I want to know pretty much how do they invest, what's their strategies, what do they have roughly what do they have invested right now, how often do they turn over stuff, if they do private equity deals, I want to know what fees do they take on every deal. That's incredibly important. All these private equity firms, which are kind of hedge fund, all these hedge funds that do private deals, they take enormous fees whenever they do stuff, and that's not fair. So I do think there's issues with that. Make sure you know exactly what the compensation is of all the hedge fund managers. I don't even care if they make money mowing people's lawns in the summer. I want to know every compensation. I want to know every piece of compensation they get, and I want to see their tax returns over the past couple of years, at least as regards what their compensation was relating to financial activities. So I don't need to know that they sold their house or did this or did that, but I want to know what kind of fees they got in every deal that they did.
There's a story that came to light about 5 or 6 weeks ago. If you're not overly familiar with it, we'll skip it. I'm going to mess up the name, but it's Archegos Bill Wong. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Oh, okay. So Bill Wong came from nothing, dirt poor Korean immigrants, worked his way up through school. Julian Robertson hires him at Tiger Management. And over decades, he works his way into Julian funding a hedge fund. And the hedge fund gets billions of dollars. So this Bill Wong is doing well. He's probably worth a couple of $100 million. Long story short, it all comes winding down about 2013. And what a surprise, because you don't want to be limited by the institutional investor. A lot of these super rich hedge fund managers, hundreds of millions to billions of net worth, what do? They form their own single family office. So this is a little bit controversial, and I have a unique take on it for someone in the family office world. So basically what this guy did, James, you have to look this up. It's an amazing story. He took his net worth of approximately 300 million and he turned it into 30 billion in 7 years. You know how hard at big dollar amounts, not penny stocks here, at big dollar amounts to what, that's what, like 150x return on hundreds of millions of dollars? That's unheard of. That's one of the greatest traders ever. Now, how did he do this and stay under the radar? Swaps. And eventually that caused billions of dollars in losses from multiple banks. So the argument is, was he doing anything illegal? As far as we know, no. And by the way, the banks were getting $100 million up from him year after year to do these swaps. They knew what they were doing. They wanted the money and the fees. I think Wong, even through swaps and leverage, to turn a couple of $100 million to what we believe to be maybe 30 billion or more, that's like unheard of. This guy's one of the greatest traders ever, a little bit the modern day Jesse Livermore. He just has terrible risk mitigation.
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, when you're financially sophisticated and you have $300 million, not only do you know what the best opportunities are, but your private banker at Goldman Sachs is giving you the best opportunity because you're a valued client with $300 million. It's no surprise to me that someone with 300 million makes billions. You make the most money if you have the most money. So I'm not surprised at that, really.
What made you change your opinion from what I read, or maybe I misread about Bitcoin? Early on, maybe in 2011 or 12, you were a little bit, I don't know if dismissive is the right word, but for now, I'll go with that.
Yeah, no,
And then,
I was totally dismissive. I thought it was a
okay,
scam.
well, then this goes back to think for yourself, admitting when you're wrong. And what made you change your opinion?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it does go along with the think for yourself.
Yeah, right.
You know, I I changed my mind. I changed my mind in politics. I changed my mind about issues and candidates, and I changed my mind about investments. But I was down on Bitcoin because probably because I just didn't understand it. And then a friend of mine, Naval Ravikant, who's heavily involved with
He's great.
Bitcoin, yeah, he came to New York and we spent all day and he explained on like a whiteboard everything to me about Bitcoin. Now, not everything, but he explained to me incredibly useful things about Bitcoin, and I changed my mind. So in March, I think in March 2013, I tweeted out Bitcoin's a scam. But then he visited me in April, and then in early June, or no, early May, I wrote some software and I created an e-commerce store that accepted Bitcoin. And I was releasing a book on June, but I did an early release that you could only buy if you paid it with zero point 0.1 Bitcoins. And if someone went to the site and spent zero point 0.1 Bitcoins, which is now $5,000, then it was zero point 0.1 was $6 because Bitcoin was 61. Then they would get a PDF of my book. So a PDF of my book is now worth, technically $5,000. And so that I know a lot of people say that, like whenever I bring up Bitcoin, they say, "Oh, didn't you say it was a fad or a scam?" Yeah, but then a month later, look what I did. I created a store and accepted Bitcoins, and then I've written books about crypto. So people are. I don't understand this whole attitude. Oh, you can't change your mind ever. But I will say that. And by the way, I've changed my mind about various cryptocurrencies and so on. But I think it's important to be aware of confirmation bias, of only looking at things that support the view you have. Like, for instance, I'd be willing to change my mind about college if someone could explain to me good reasons for going to college. So all this stuff's very important. But I remember with at that time in 2013, when I started selling my book for early release in Bitcoin only, CNBC asked me to come on and explain what I did. And then one of the anchors said, "Did you just do this as a marketing gimmick?" And I said, "Well, I'm on national TV right now, so I think it worked."
No, very good point. I do want to be concise. I probably have 4 to 5 more questions left. In theory, I got like 40 to 50 more questions, but we'll do a part two a little later in the year. But in maybe a little bit of a rapid fire, I don't know how closely it sounds like you do follow even things like governments and central bank digital currencies, which are completely different than Bitcoin. This is centralized. But this is coming. To think that we're going to use paper dollars for the next 100 years, you're kidding yourself. It's going to be in 5 or 10 more years. It's going to be through central bank digital currencies. The government will have complete control, knowing what you buy, controlling your interest rates. You won't really, to the on bank, need even a savings or a checking account. That's another thing that will hurt small to mid-sized banks. And they might even be able to tax you on the spot. This sounds like it's going to be easy and convenient, but it's going to be very big brother. Do you think this is happening sooner rather than later?
I think it will happen eventually. It's hard to say. Like, I get a little nervous of all the government controls that have been put in place just because of this pandemic. For instance, a lot of stores and restaurants don't like accepting cash because they think maybe it's got COVID on it. Maybe it does. I don't know. But it just makes me nervous. Like, even right now, pretty much all transactions, the government knows what you buy. Like, that's why there's so much data about you and me on all the different services that sell data. They know how many strawberries you ate last month. Like, they know everything. So I do think eventually, though, we will be some kind of hybrid between the American dollar and some form of cryptocurrency. And I think that's probably sooner rather than later. but they're just looking at it now. And remember, I do think a lot of people who work at places like the Federal Reserve are incredibly smart, but in general, government moves slow. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, a question I have, and I only mean this a little bit tongue in cheek, I'm actually partially serious about it. With modern monetary policy and printing money like there's no tomorrow, why do I pay taxes? Can't the government pay for its expenses by simply printing more money?
That's a great point, because I was speaking to someone who works at the Federal Reserve, one of the deputy chairman of one of the main banks, and this was about a year ago this month. And I said, it was right after all the money was printed for the first stimulus. And I said, what if this creates inflation? How do you guys know this is not creating inflation? And he said something interesting, which is that we're not worried about inflation. We're worried about deflation. Right now, there's been massive deflation. And he said we could print money like this every other month for the next 4 or 5 years at least. Because again, what other currency are people going to go into? They're not going to go into the euro. They're not going to go into the different kinds of pesos or the yen or the Chinese currency. They're going to stick to the dollar. And there's so much demand for the dollar that we could keep printing money and borrowing money at 0% interest rates, and people keep buying it because they're trying to get the money out of their country into our country. So he made a really good point, and you're making a good point that, yeah, why are we paying taxes? We could just keep printing money if what this guy says is true. Now, a lot of economists say the money supply has increased, so that means inflation will result. And we saw the numbers this month that food prices, energy prices, and so on went up. But think about it though, like computers, every year computers get, the prices go down and the computers get more powerful. Cars, prices go down or stay the same, but the cars get more powerful. Right now we have things like Uber or Airbnb. So you could even, either make more money renting out a house by Airbnb-ing it, or you could save money by not staying at hotels and staying in cheaper Airbnbs that are nice and big and fit the family and so on. So there's all these, technology has given us all these deflationary mechanisms that aren't really tabulated when they look. They're still tabulating inflation the way they did 70 years ago. And that's probably not the correct way to do it. So I do believe that we're in a like right now in New York City, JP Morgan is an example. They're going to stop leasing office space. Maybe they'll lease a floor or two, but they used to lease tens of millions of dollars of office space. Well, they're going to stop because people are working remotely. So that's a huge deflationary effect that's happening around the country right now. So I'm not sure where I stand on the deflation versus inflation issue, but it's definitely not as easy as people think. And certainly the very intelligent people at the Federal Reserve think there's deflation and they're trying to fight it. By the way, we had this huge inflation number, but it's the first time in a long time that we've started averaging above 2% inflation, which is historically extremely low. So I think you make a good point. I've wondered this myself. Why can't they just print up money and we don't have to pay taxes for a year? That would be the best stimulus in my view.
Yeah, like everyone's going to vote for that president.
Yeah, done. That's the winner.
There used to be a saying, he who holds the gold makes the rules. How about a new rule? He who controls the money supply makes the rules. So if that's true, are the true world leaders the central banks?
Yeah, I do think so. Now, in some cases, like in the US, the central bank is specifically supposed to stay separate and independent from the president. But
So
you
the
look
Fed.
at the Fed, yeah. But you look at places like China or Russia, where the central bank of China and Russia is essentially Putin and Xi in China, and they control the central banks. So in that case,
Exactly.
That's a very specific case where the leaders are the central bank. But I do think, the power does lie. The Federal Reserve has an enormous amount of power, more than Congress has, probably more than the president has. Think about it. What can the president? This is a good question to everybody who goes to college. What does the president actually do? What are the constitutional powers of the presidency?
Declare war?
Declare war. When was the last time, as per the Constitution, a U.S. president declared war?
It's been a long time.
Yeah, December 8th, 1941. So that's the last time we've been in a constitutionally declared war. I'm not saying all the other wars were illegal, but the if you respect the Constitution, that was the last legal war. Okay, so that's a pretty big power, but what other powers does the president have?
You tell me. Not much.
Yeah, not much. Now, Trump tried to say, well, we have these executive orders, but that's not really in the Constitution. And a lot of his executive orders, people sort of ignored anyway. And, they have the power to negotiate treaties, but Congress has to approve the treaty. So, and they go to funerals and throw parties. That's what they do. But every president since John Adams has taken more and more power, and they never give it back. So I'm worried they took so much power during these economic lockdowns. Like, think about it. I think it's the 26th Amendment in the Constitution, or no, maybe it's in the first 10 amendments. But you cannot deprive someone of their ability to make a living without due process. Well, everybody was deprived of making a living during these lockdowns, and there was no due process. And every place where it went up to the state constitution, where people sued and it went up to the state constitution, the state Supreme Court, the government lost because it's unconstitutional to close down a business without due process. That's like a fundamental law in the US. And yet we so easily caved in to letting our rights be taken. Now, exactly. I'm not saying we shouldn't have been careful. It's pandemic, lives were lost. I'm just saying be aware of what happened, of what you gave up as a citizen, because you're not getting those rights back now. They never go back. So we just have to be aware of this.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. A little bit on the subject of central banks. We're probably both going to get in a little bit of trouble. Yes, you're correct. Around the world, the influential leaders and families are dominant behind them. I don't know if that's that different in the so-called Western countries. We don't even theoretically know the banks, do we, that make up the Fed? We could assume JP Morgan, Goldman. And who's the leaders there? Who's the majority shareholder, even though they're public companies? So what you said about Russia and other countries, is it that different here?
It might not be. Look, we do know Jerome Powell, who's the Fed chairman right now, he is making the decisions. Now, does he go to Goldman?
He's being told what to do.
Yeah, but he's actually an incredibly smart guy, and you have to figure a Goldman, a JP Morgan, they're all going to recommend things that make them money. Whereas he's trying to, in very difficult times, he's trying to save the country. And I think he's done a fairly good job. A very good job. And I don't know how deeply they're told to do things. Now, we saw in 2008, there was a lot of difference in opinion between the major banks and the Fed. But the Fed, though, makes a decision. Okay, we're going to open up the credit window to banks. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And it's the Fed ultimately that makes these decisions about what to purchase. Now, but we don't even really know what they're purchasing. For all we know, they're buying the stock market every day. Like, we have no idea.
Exactly. My last question, but it is a pretty intense one. I read it approximately 10 months ago. You wrote something that went incredibly viral, basically that New York is dead. And Jerry Seinfeld responded back, I agreed 90% with you, but it has now been 10 months. If you could briefly recap what you wrote and how you feel now.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote an article called New York City is Dead Forever. Here's why. And a lot of people were upset at me. I think they didn't really read the article, because the article says, I love New York City. I don't want it to die. Here are the problems. And I don't know any solutions, because the problems are very deep. And I feel people are in denial. So I want to explain what the problems are. And everybody flipped out. So, some of the problems are basically, there's been an exodus of New Yorkers and San Francisco people and LA people. And
going to Austin, going to Florida, going to Nashville, going to other locations.
Yeah, real estate prices in Southern Florida are through the roof because 500,000 New Yorkers moved here in the past year. And that's the biggest exodus ever from New York City. And on top of it, there's violent crimes has shot up 200%. It's like New York City was 30 years ago. And sanitation workers are not going to work. So there's garbage all over the streets. The police are not going to work because they don't know what the rules are. And de Blasio keeps changing the rules on them. And by the way, I'm not making this up. Like, I know, I did my research. These things are happening. Uh, uh, you know, Major office buildings in Midtown are largely empty still, even though New York has roughly opened for corporations. The Time Life building, which is one of the biggest office buildings in Midtown, is 5% full today, and on and on and on. Thousands of restaurants went bankrupt. Broadway essentially went bankrupt. Who's gonna invest in the next Broadway theater show? People say, "Oh, when culture comes back, New York will come back." Who's going to invest in the next Broadway show? Like, if you just lost all your money on the last one, so because you were shut down. So, and this leads to a death spiral. So what happens is New York obviously is going to collect fewer taxes over the next year or 2 years because people are leaving, and then New York's gonna have to fire people because they're paying for too many services, and so there's gonna be fewer services. With fewer services, there's gonna be fewer people who want to move to New York, and particularly with everybody moving to Austin or Miami or Denver or wherever, industries are moving out of the major cities. You don't have to be in major cities now. A lot of sociologists say, well, you need cities to have ideas. That might be true, but now Zoom has created like virtual cities for us. So I wrote this with very good intentions in mind, is that let's now solve some of these problems. Here's another big problem. The velocity of money in New York City has gone to essentially zero. So velocity of money is when you get paid $1, how many times will that dollar be spent in New York City? So you buy a newspaper with that dollar, the newspaper guy buys a coffee with that dollar, the coffee guy buys flowers with that dollar. So the average velocity of money is around 10 for a city like New York City. The dollar will be spent 10 times before it leaves the city. Well, now people get paid and it goes straight to Seattle, to Amazon. So the velocity of money has gone to nothing. This is gonna affect the GDP of New York City and other major cities. We can't even calculate the problems related to that. So I wanted people to be, I wanted to show that I love the city. I wrote many stories about, I was born there. I lived there my whole life. And I wanted to show people I love the city, but don't be in denial of the problems. And then I just got crucified. And then, suddenly Jerry Seinfeld, who I like and admire, Jerry Seinfeld wrote an entire one-page op-ed in the New York Times, not even addressing any of my issues, but just trashing me. Right. And I thought, and then I realized, okay, he's never written an op-ed in his life. He has a book coming out soon, so this is probably related to that. But all he did was insult me, and then everybody jumped on that bandwagon and started insulting me. I mean, to this day on Twitter, there's maybe 100 tweets today insulting me because of that article. Like they show pictures of people drinking coffee outside and say, "What do you say now, James? Clearly, New York City is not dead."
You were a hell of a lot more right than wrong.
Yeah.
I've been to New York 20 times since then. And in the winter, it was horrific with restaurants and bars, office buildings, cold weather, things going to hell in a handbasket. Yeah, the warmer weather has helped. Things are opening up more. And I want to be optimistic. But everything you said is so true. I've been to Miami, it feels like a dozen times in the last couple of months. The New Yorkers have moved there. They're very friendly to business, to opening up. It just feels completely different. No state tax. I mean, I don't even know where. Now, how could I make the argument, though, James, for New York? Could I say that there's great universities in New York and Boston, that it draws young people that want cultural variances, that it's great restaurants, Broadway, but a lot of those are closed. Could you make a case for New York recovering sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, this whole period is one of surprise. So, we'll see what happens. Unfortunately, now, like, everybody like took so serious, like now it's like because so many people were trashing me. I hope New York City survives, but there's a little tendency in me now to want it to not survive just because everybody, millions of people trashed me. And, but yeah, I think, of course, a case could be made that New York City survives faster than people think. But I sort of doubt it, because we're not going to see. I mean, I've talked to many of the mayoral candidates. I've talked to people who are running for comptroller. New York State's about to have an election in a month. So I talked to people running for comptroller, which is the financial, they hold the financial strings. They don't know. A lot of these people don't know what they're doing. And the people who do know what they're doing agree with my article. So it's not like everybody disagreed with my article. Most people agreed with it. It's just that they didn't say anything because so many people were upset and trashing it in New York City. By the way, outside of New York City, everyone loved my article, of course, but in New York City, it was this, I own a comedy club in New York City. It was vandalized actually because of my article. Employees that I have in New York City were physically harassed on the street because they wore a T-shirt that had my name on it. And it's New York City is a strange place.
Yeah. Now, again, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Boston, a lot of them, San Francisco may be worse. They're having their own problems, which relates again to the advantages of the Nevadas, Wyoming, Texas, Florida, and other. And again, don't underestimate Nashville, Tennessee, pretty cool place. I do want to be respectful of your time. We'll have you back for a part two, and I do want to do a close. But before I do that, I'm going to highly recommend your podcast, your IG, which is your Instagram. If you can mention your podcast name, how people could follow you, learn more about you on IG, on YouTube, sure, whatever, please.
Yeah, it's the James Altucher Show, and I'm very proud of it. Been running since 2014. And that's really the main place you can find me is the James Altucher Show. On Twitter, I'm Jay Altucher. You can always tweet me. I'm altucher@gmail.com on Gmail. And occasionally you can see me on Google Maps if you look hard enough. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. It was really an honor to have you on. I definitely look forward to having you on in the near future. And a little bit of my wrap up, again, probably my fanboy came out because I just love the great creative mind that James is. It was really an honor to interview him. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles podcast. And I guess my day job is I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to amongst the world's wealthiest families that often have their own single family office. You could check out our website, familyofficeassociation.com. I'm very active on social. Given the new digital era, my YouTube platform is Family Office, and I'm very active with a lot of these questions I asked James, what I call things to ponder, on Instagram, actually, of all things. So it's boring, but on my company name there, Family Office Association, please follow me on Instagram. Check us out on social media, especially YouTube, where we're Family Office, as I noted, where this interview should certainly be up. James, I thank you so much for your time. My audience, thank you so much. Look forward to the next time.
Thanks, Angelo. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine. Thanks.